Hey everyone, welcome to my second part of my tips, tricks and hints series. I would highly recommend, of course, that you watch the first one before you watch the second one, and as always, don't forget to give it a thumbs up to show your support, and of course leave your comments down below. So let us continue. So, once you are in the actual game itself, you gotta hit T to activate your SAS to keep it stable and centered to wherever you're pointed to. This pretty much is effective in the atmosphere, but you can disregard that once you hit space. Now, to get the orbit is pretty easy. Around the 6.5, 7.5 thousand meter mark, the atmosphere is very thin, so you're going to burn up substantially less fuel. So I'm going to wait till right around, I would recommend between 10 to 15,000 meters. You're going to go 90 degrees. 90 degrees is at the ball here, so 90 degrees is here. You see 90 mark. I'm going to go 90 degrees at a 45 degree angle, so it means here. And then I'm going to go at a 0 degree angle at 90 degrees. And that I'm going to do between 10 to 15,000 meters. Remember, when you hit M, my trajectory is this blue line here, so I need that blue line there to go. The blue line has to go all the way around Kerbal, so I have an orbit shooting up into space at 500,000 meters. Doesn't mean I'm going to have an orbit, it means I just have a massive line, let's say all the way here, a V. A nice V shape. It means I'm going to go all the way to 500,000, I'm going to go all the way down. It means I spent all my energy just to get high instead of all the way around. High, by I mean around the actual Kerbal. Now I am at the 15,000 mark. I'm going to go 90 degrees, which is down here. So I was in map. I should have released the boosters a little bit earlier, but it's fine. It means we're going to burn a little bit of extra fuel. So then let's take a look at how we're doing. We are actually very, very well. I'm going to go more 90 degrees. We are at 45,000 meters. We're going to go at a much steeper. Now we're nearly at a 0 degree angle. As you see, it is starting to open up. But again, it's not increasing the height as much, which I don't like, because I'm going to be being pulled in. Remember, you're going to be being pulled in because there's gravity. The gravity stops to break your actual trajectory once you exceed that 70,000 mark. So once I hit that 70, which I just did now, I'm going to go 0 degree at a 90 degree angle. So 0 degrees at 90 degree angle. And I'm going to cut my actual engines there. You see, it is decreasing the actual... I'm going to put on my RCS so it stays, and I'm going to cut it now. And is it still decreasing? It isn't decreasing as much. It is finally holding at... it is a little bit holding. We can speed it up now. We can get up there. Remember, if I burn at the apoapsis, or at the highest part, I consume less fuel. So that's my whole point, since I don't even think I'll be able to do an orbit. You see my RCS is on now. So just to give you an example on how effective this is, let's slow it down. Let's switch off my RCS. Now I only have my SAS, so I'm going to push the down button. Look how long it takes for me to move up. I am holding down the whole time, okay? I'm pushing the down arrow. It's not even bothered to move. Let's put on the RCS, push the down arrow. Look at that move. You see? The RCS in space is the thing to have. If you don't have RCS and you have a big ship, it's really, really difficult to control. But with the RCS, it's substantially easier to control a large ship. Now, of course, don't use it radically for no reason whatsoever, because it does run out, especially with the latest upgrades to the actual game. The RCS is consumed quite a lot. So another thing that'll help you move is, of course, the accelerating. Accelerating, of course, does help you to stay on track with the SAS on. So that's another thing to do. If you have a little bit of acceleration, you don't need to use the RCS as much. So that's another tip I'd like to do. Don't forget, you can right click stuff to disable it. So I can disable this engine. If I have 5-6 engines, I can disable one. If I have a different build, if I have more SAS units on different structures that I'm going to be throwing out, I can disable this one at this by clicking this, and then enable it once I deploy those. So like that, I'll use the SAS of different attachments, which will be thrown out and decoupled. Again, I'm going to try to get as much. Again, you're going to aim at the yellow circle, not the yellow with the X. I'm going to put my RCS on because it's much easier to turn on my RCS on. I'm going to then hit TSAS to balance it out there. And we are nearly there. Switch off, increase my actual throttle. I'm not sure if I'll be able to make an orbit, but I will try my best to make an orbit as effectively as possible. So I'm going to be cutting the engines quite a lot. Cutting the engines, you push X and it'll cut your engine immediately. So that's a good shortcut to have in mind. X does cut your engines, so that's one of the shortcuts that I will be running. Now we're nearly there actually. Let's put on our SAS, move back down. I do hope I manage to make an orbit with this. Now we will increase our speed. There we go, and we do have an orbit again. I would recommend to have your orbit the other side, the periapsis. You have the apoapsis and the periapsis. I would recommend to have the other side go at least to 80,000, above 70,000, otherwise it'll get pulled back down to Earth because of gravity. Now officially I have an orbit, so this is your orbit, ladies and gentlemen, and you can begin your docking now. So this is it in terms of getting an orbit. It's very easy. You don't need a large ship to do that, a large ship at all. Now I hit one, of course, since I don't have a manned probe. I need power. Now how I deployed all of these, it is action groups. If you want to know how to use action groups, I would recommend you look at my action groups tutorial. Now, if for some reason you lose control or you can't control your ship, as mentioned before, it is a few things could happen. One, you have no electricity on your actual ship or your actual part. You'll know that by right-clicking. You'll see electricity charge, or hitting your resource panel, your electricity will be 0. If your electricity is 0, your SAS doesn't work, your RCS doesn't work. Generally, you can't turn or move your ship whatsoever. The only thing you can do, which doesn't use I think even your engines, as you do see now, use electricity. So pretty much you can't do anything without electricity. You can't even start up your engines. Maybe some engines don't, but from the looks of it, I do think that really all engines, pretty much everything is linked to electricity. So if you have no electricity, you can't do anything. You can't, none of the keys will work, nothing will work, and you won't know why. So that's one of the reasons. Another reason is that your SAS is on. If your SAS is on, and then I'm moving up and down and pushing my keys now, since it is possible to move using just my SAS, even though it's very slow, but it's not moving at all, that's because I have it on. I have to switch off my SAS, which I did now, and now I'm going to push right, and it's going to slowly move right. You see, it is a very, very slow movement. It is a really, really slow movement. It is moving there. And that's what happens when you're in orbit and you don't have RCS. You see how slowly it's moving? And now that is one reason if you have your SAS on. Now another reason why it's not moving, it's because you're in warp. If you're warping and you're trying to move, that also doesn't work. So moving while warped doesn't do it as well. So that's another reason why that might not work. If you're trying to move while warped, that also might not work. So keep that in mind. Now another thing I would recommend for you to do when you're in orbit is to at least have, of course, the higher in orbit you are, the more fuel you need to burn to get there. But if you have an orbit of 120,000 and more, that being both, that being apoapsis and periapsis, the highest point and the lowest point, I can't even remember the names. All I know is the highest point is because I move on and it shows 1,800 meters, and this is 82. So I know this is my lowest point. So if you have a perfect orbit of, let's say, 120,000 meters on both, of course, to increase the height of this, you go on the opposite end and you find on your globe, by using your RCS, you move around, you find that yellow circle, just the yellow circle. You burn towards the yellow circle, you increase the opposite end. If you burn on this side, on the yellow circle with a cross on it, you decrease the orbit. It goes smaller. If you do the same thing here, if I go here and then I find the yellow circle on this actual globe and I burn to it, it increases, and if I burn towards the yellow circle with a cross, it decreases it. Now if I make an orbit of 120,000 meters on both sides, I will then have enough altitude so I can actually burn, so I can actually time warp at 50 times and faster, which is great because when you are time warping, as you see, I can maximum time warp 50, but if I'm over 120, I can actually start time warp even 100 times faster, so that's 100 speed. So I would recommend, if you put yourself on orbit, put yourself above 120,000, preferably even higher. Now in terms of other things that you can do, another good key to remember is F5. If you push F5, you see quick saving, and if I hold F9, it will load my latest quick save, which means it'll load where I previously was. This is very useful if you're trying to dock with something or you're trying to land on a planet and you have spent hours and hours getting there. So F5, quick save it, and if you mess it up, just hold down F9. So this should allow you to repeat different stuff such as docking or landing on different planets, and retrying until you finally do get it right. Now another thing that you could, or it's pretty useful, you can open up the debug menu. To open up the debug menu, you hold Control and Control Alt left shift and D, and there you have your debug menu. Of course you can do this with various things, so on and so forth, and that should pretty much help you debug in case you'd like to debug. Now let's remove that. Control Alt Shift D, and we have removed that. Let's again quick load, go back to where we were. Now of course keep in mind when you are doing the debug mode that the left shift will increase your speed, yeah, so that's why I reloaded it. So when you are going into debug mode, make sure that either you change the settings of the left shift or you disable your engine when you are doing that. To disable, of course, you can right click as mentioned before. Now let's hit the M button. To set target, for example, if I am trying to dock, I can set target. To do that, I can either left click the ship, set target, or I can left click the actual orbital line of the actual target that I'm trying to get to. So if I'm trying to get to my space center, I just left click and I set it as target, and it will set that target, or I left click and unset it. Another thing, of course, is the navigation, which came on as you add maneuver. You left click your line, you add maneuver, and you can pretty much do all the maneuvers you want. Exactly what they are, how they work, it doesn't really matter. All you can do is play around. You should think this is up, this is down, and this moves along the axis, and this is forward and back. So for example, take a look at this. I did forward, because remember it works on the opposite side. So if I do forward from this side, it goes there, and if I do up from this side, it goes there. So that's pretty much it. And now to cancel your maneuvers is when you add a maneuver, you just right click the maneuver and you have the X, and then you click the actual cross. Now in terms of switching to other things on the actual plane here is same thing. You double click. I just double clicked my space center, so I'll show you my space center. And here is my space center. This is the Morcast Space Center. This is a very, very large spaceship that I have created. As you do see, it has mainly, it has 3 nuclear engines for interplanetary travel, and I do have 3 standard, you can say, engines T-45s. So these aren't vectoring, but more powerful, and of course consume more fuel. And these in general, they consume very little fuel, but they last forever. So in a way this is made for interplanetary travel, but I still have left it orbiting my actual planet. Now for example, if you are trying to dock any ship, a space station, with another ship, and you have multiple docking ports, it doesn't mean you need to add multiple capsules, just so you have control of that current position. So for example, if I'm trying to dock this part, if I am coming in from a spaceship and I see that this part is the closest, so all I have to do is right click that docking port and say select control from here, and automatically it'll convert the actual globe and target in relation to that actual docking port as being the main control point, instead of having multiple pods just to have that control from here point. So all you got to do is right click and say control from here, and that's pretty much it. Now another thing to keep in mind, if I want to set a target of let's say the untitled spacecraft, I'd set it as a target, and I'd like to know how far or what in relation I am, how fast I am in relation to the target. All I gotta do is left click this part here, and it'll switch to surface, and if I left click again, it'll switch to target. So currently I am 4,330 meters faster in relation to my target. That's how fast I'm in relation to my target. Of course, to slow it down, all I gotta do is move to the yellow circle with a cross in it, and I burn towards that, which is the opposite in relation to my target. But that is in more detail for my docking, so I'll be covering that in my docking point. The main thing is here, to get control of a certain point, you can right click and select from here if you have multiple docking ports on your ship, so you don't need multiple actual pods to give you that control. So let's switch back to my actual untitled aircraft. Where is the damn thing? Let's just unset it, and there it is. Double click it, and we shall go in my untitled aircraft. Now another thing to keep in mind, when you are quitting the game, you're gonna hit escape and you're gonna hit end flight. This probably has happened to you substantially. It has happened to me quite a lot. Ending flight will actually end the flight. It means when you come back to the game, it won't be there. So don't make this mistake. You will do it whether you like it or not. Don't hit end flight if you want to continue with the shuttle or the actual satellite or unmanned rocket that you launched. You're gonna have to hit the space center and then hit end flight. When you hit the space center, you can then go back, and then you can quit the game from here. If you're gonna hit end flight, it'll actually delete that actual flight itself. It'll delete it so you won't have it anymore, and you're gonna have to redo the whole thing again. So if you're spending a lot of time trying to fly to a point, don't hit end flight. That'll pretty much do you in, and you're gonna have to do the whole thing again. Now let's go back to my untitled craft. Untitled spacecraft, I just double click it on the space tracking center, and I'm back to my craft. Another main important thing is when you failed with your launch, or your launch blew up or something happened in terms of just launching your aircraft, when you do end the flight of the aircraft, you're gonna have flight events log. It's very important, especially when you're launching, to check the flight events log, because the flight event log pretty much tells you where it failed and what failed. And when you take a look at what failed, you can reinforce that with more struts or reposition it so that things don't happen. Majority of the times when there are failures, it is usually between two linkages. It means let's take a look at my super tanker. I'll explain to you where these two linkages are. You can improve that by putting struts or struts between the two different layers. So I'll show you exactly what I do have here. You see my tankers have struts between each other, and they also have struts from inside as well between each other. Now when you see failure, you see where that failure is, and then you place struts. But of course, in that flight log that you've seen, sometimes there's a lot of fuel tanks and you won't know which fuel tank it is. So it's of course a very good idea to keep an eye on your actual launch from the top part or from the side part and all around the place, and see which one fails and where exactly it fails, and then reinforce that part, and you'll see exactly where it fails. So if it tells me the fuel tank failed in my SAS, so I know one of my fuel tanks probably rammed into SAS because there's just too much power. So I'm going to take a look next time. I'm going to relaunch it, take a look where it failed, and if I see that this one failed, I'm going to go back and I'm going to reinforce this one, including the actual SAS. So I'm going to have a strut between the SAS and my main tank, and a strut between the tank and my main actual structure itself. And after this, what we can do is I'm going to go back to my space center. And another thing you might have issues with is debris and unknowns from your actual orbit. In the beginning it might not be a big deal, but later on there'll be so many, it'll be very hard to actually select a target and set it as a target, because there'll be so much things orbiting. To cancel your unknown debris, you can left click the unknown debris if you have it here and hit X, and then it'll pop up, a box will come and you click yes, cancel the flight, and you'll kill all your unknown debris. Now just the unknowns. Now to remove your debris is you're gonna go to your settings to remove the debris, and hold on, you're gonna go to then the general tab, and yes, you have the max persistent debris. It's I think set at 100 or something. You're gonna set it at 0, and once you hit the debris at 0, you will see that you're gonna have a completely clean orbit. Of course, if your orbit is dirty and then you set it to 0, you're gonna have to save it, or actually quit the game, save the game, and reload the game again. So I'm gonna go to my Morcom Space Center, and I'm gonna hit my tracking, and you're gonna see I have no debris and no nothing at all. In case I did have, what I'll do is I just go back, go to settings, set it as 0, maximum debris, and reload my game again, and there will be no debris at all in that game. So you're gonna have to get out of your game, set the thing to 0, and reload your game again, and there will be no debris. The unknowns will stay there, but the unknowns you remove from your tracking, which I just told you. Now another useful thing as well to know is you can actually lock your staging system. Now locking your staging system is very useful, especially since you are in orbit and you don't want to do you don't want to hit by mistake your spacebar, and that does happen. Especially, let's say, if the last stage of your thing is set up so it parachutes down. So, for example, the last stage I'm going to have it set up so it parachutes down. So it means I'm going to have a decoupler, which separates, of course, anything below my decoupler, and on top of my decoupler I'm going to have a parachute. Of course, just for example's sake, let's presume this was a manned pod, so I would have a parachute on my actual manned pod. Now the decoupler is, I'd put it at a separate stage, so my decoupler would be here, and I wouldn't want to release my decoupler under any circumstances, so I'm gonna save it here and relaunch the actual thing again. Here I am back now. For example's sake, let's say I was still in orbit and I was now somewhere close to the moon, and I didn't want to by mistake hit my spacebar, so I would activate this decoupler. So what I would do is I'd hold Alt and L, and that locks my spacebar. So now when I hit space, you see nothing happens, and I'm hitting my spacebar. Now for example's sake, I am heading towards the moon, and now my thing is locked. So I'm going to increase the speed just to show you. See, I'm already 100,000 meters up in the air. Now for example, I am coming close towards the moon and I'm trying to land, and I do need to decouple because I do need to, I don't know, let's say not the moon, that was a bad example, let's say Juno, I want to release my parachute, or back to Kerbal. I do want to finally decouple and get back down to Earth. Now as you see, I can't hit the decouple when I'm pushing the space bar, and it's not working. So let's what I'm gonna do is again hold Alt L and then hit space, and there you go, we have a decoupling. So Alt and L locks your actual decouple stage, which is very useful, so by mistake you don't actually engage your stage separation. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed my second part of my Tips and Tricks and Hints series for the Kerbal Space Program. As always, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and see you guys in part 3. Happy gaming!